Hi, so we're looking at farming and taxation from Middle Kingdom onwards. So back in the Old Kingdom, the population of farmers were working for the nomarchs and for the kings and the priests. They didn't have any rights as individuals. They weren't even called people until the beginning of the Middle Kingdom. So now that the peasant farmers have a relationship with the king, well, obviously they have to pay their taxes. Now, if you can remember, the agricultural season was Akhed, which was the flood season, Pariet, which was the sowing season, and Shimu, which was the harvest. So we're going to start our journey during the season of Pariet. So the first thing to do is hopefully the flood waters have drained away now, and they're left with this grid of fill pattern which they created before the flood came at the end of the harvest. So what you have is floodplain farming. So you have one square full of water next to a field where you want to grow your harvest, and then another flood square, etc. So they captured water after the flood. That was the whole point of it. So if you can remember that hieroglyph grid, which represents a town or city, that's to do with the farming, and that's laying out the floodplain farming. So first thing is to sow. Now, ploughing the fields, well, you could do it by hand if you was on your own. If you had a couple of animals or one animal, you could pull the plough with oxen or a cow, and then it would be time to scatter the seeds. So if you're a farmer on your own with a wife and a couple of kids, the whole family is invested in this operation. Remember, the son is going to learn his trade from his father. So with a very short life cycle of between 30 to 45 years of age, skills are passed on from one generation to another, from father to son. So no one had choices of careers or things like that. Then, so you scatter the seeds, you drive your sheep or your goats over the seeds to stamp them into the soil. Now, Herodotus, who was a Greek philosopher who visited Egypt during the Greek period, commented how easy and fertile the soil was. So once the seeds were sown, as long as you kept away the birds and the insects, things would grow in Egypt. Well, when the crop got to a certain height, that's when the scribe would come along. So the scribe is the king's man. He might work for the nomarch, who's been appointed to collect taxes on behalf of the king, but he is the king's man. And they always had a couple of bully boys with him. So the scribe would come around and assess how good a harvest it would be and what the taxation would be on those fields. Well, anything could happen between Pariet and Shimu. As I said before, the birds might eat the crop. There might be an influx of insects, and whatever happened, those taxes would have to be paid. No matter what, even if the farmer was left short. So we now come on to the season of Shimu. Now, in our society, we have machines to do everything. In their society, if they were lucky, they might have a donkey or cow to help them with the heavy lifting. But the first thing to do is to cut that harvest. You've got to cut it from the bottom, and you're out in that hot sun and you're cutting down this harvest. So a lot of farmers would wear a shirt while they were doing this sort of business. Then once you've cut the harvest, you've got to then pick it up from the fields, take it back to your homestead. Now, your homestead is built on a dike. That's where your home's going to be, on a dike. And most peasant farmers just had a room where they would store their tools and their foodstuffs, and they would sleep on top of the room, in the open air or surrounded by screens in their winter months. So again, moving that from A to B was pretty hard work. Then you'd have to prepare the fields for the next flood to get that grid pattern for floodplain farming. So you had to prepare the fields with mud brick walls to capture the water after the next flood. Then the flood comes in June, the season of Akhet. That's when you have to start processing your harvest. So all the grains have to be pulled off the stalks. Once the grains have been pulled off the stalks, the grains have to be sifted, get rid of all the chaff bits, or sometimes thrown into the air, called willowing. Thrown into the air so the chaff blows away and the heavier grains fall down. Then it has to be picked up and stored in silos. Hopefully, if you was a peasant farmer, you'd have a silo, and along would come the scribe with his 2 bully boys, maybe even 3, to collect the taxes. Now, a lot of farmers would have to think about their families. How much food do I need to get through the next year before the next harvest? And if they had had a poor harvest, they might hide some food. That's when the bully boys would start laying into the peasant farmer, and he knows, that farmer, that if he lets that food go, then his family would starve during the next year. So it seemed to be touch and go. Obviously, you'd have a few wide boys. You get wide boys in every society who's trying to pull a fast one on the scribe. But the things with the scribes is they were copyists. So once they set a tax, another scribe would copy those taxes, and whatever happened, those taxes had to be collected. So maybe a copy went off to the great house, the king's house, and he knew exactly what tax was due. The nomarch would have to collect those taxes, otherwise he couldn't take his cut. So everyone was dependent on the harvest being correct. So that's how it was. The sorts of tools which the farmer used was a scythe, a wooden handled scythe which was mounted with flint blades, and that was his cutting edge. In the Old Kingdom, when there were times of trouble, the king would call upon his people to defend the realm. The farmer would go off with his scythe or his small flint axe. Those were his weapons. His working tools were his weapons, but not anymore. From the times of Nepepet Ra, remember, he recruited Nubians to fight for him. So there is a sort of a professional army in Egypt now. So a soldier's career is certainly different from a farmer's career. Well, so how did the farmers do in comparison to everyone else in the ancient world, the people of those who dwell across the sand in Amuru and the retinue and the Levant? Well, they had security. Remember, Egypt's got 2 deserts either side, Central Africa at the bottom in the south, the Mediterranean at the top in the north. So they were pretty insulated against sudden attacks. So farmers and the people in Egypt had a security, something which they didn't have in the great expanse, the great crescent, the Levant. Because there were no determined borders, people could encroach and there would be arguments, and you can see that the comments that the Egyptians made about the Canaanites and the Syrians, those troublesome people. And then you had the Asiatics, the Greeks and the people from Mitanni and Haiti, and some of the Assyrians come in, causing all sorts of trouble. Whereas in Egypt it was pretty stable. So a farmer could raise his family in relatively comfortable conditions. And yes, there were some famines when the floodwaters never came, because the snow and the rainfall wasn't enough in Ethiopia, but 9 times out of 10 they always had very good surpluses in ancient Egypt. So that's the life of the farmer. Okay, don't forget to press the subscribe button, and I'll see you real soon. Bye for now.